Well, Wednesday marks 3 months since the deadly wildfires on Maui. Today on Spotlight Now, we catch up with Governor Josh Green on how relief efforts are going on the island of Maui.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. Tomorrow they will be announcing, the state that is, will be announcing the Maui Recovery Fund, what monies will be available for fire victims, and what other resources are out there. Plus, we're going to catch up on Red Hill and other issues facing the state. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
And joining us live here in our studio is Governor Josh Green. Good morning, Governor. Thanks so much for joining us. Or good afternoon, I should say. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We want to start off, as we talked about Maui, with tomorrow marking that 3-month mark. You also recently made some amendments to the emergency proclamation to adapt to some of the things in the recovery efforts going on there. What can you tell us specifically about what some of those amendments are and how things are going overall as we hit this 3-month milestone?
Well, thank you for asking. So yes, our hearts are still with the folks on Maui because there's just so much to do to bring normalcy back to their lives. The latest, which was the 8th iteration of the emergency proclamation, made clear some of the issues that revolve around housing, for example. We wanted to make sure that people knew that if they owned a condominium, they could continue to rent to people who are needing housing. And there's a huge coalition of support for that. As you know, FEMA and Bob and all those folks, they're all making sure that people can get rental assistance. But some of the rules at Airbnbs, any of the short-term rentals, timeshares, they would normally preclude people being able to stay in a place like one of those buildings. So that was one of many examples. We're also continuing a lot of our advocacy positions so that people can't gouge. There's been some concerns and reports of gouging on prices, particularly in the housing market because it's so tight now. So we're going to be very mindful of that, and we'll just keep updating the emergency proclamation as long as necessary. The mayor also needs emergency support because right now we are at 6,791 people in hotels. That's down from a peak of 7,996, but that still leaves a lot of people that are going to need other solutions for housing. So he'll need support where we're going to build some transitional housing. He'll need support for just so many of these other options that may be necessary.
You know, on the subject of housing, the great thing is that the viewers have already started submitting comments and questions, and so I want to bring in this one from Emma, who says, for Governor Green, are the rental and eviction freezes continued in the Emergency Proclamation 8 enough, considering the already high rental market and cost of living? Should more be done to ensure fire survivors and others can find affordable long-term rental housing? All roads lead to housing. We knew that before the fires, frankly, but obviously this has really brought that to the forefront.
Well, you can never do enough in some ways. I mean, there are only certain things the government can do, which is freeze those prices, prevent evictions. We will look to weigh that other options that we have to build. A lot of people would like us to allow for extra ADUs, the alternative dwelling units, to be built. They actually have that in statute over on Maui, and I think that's something that a lot of people are looking at as far as supporting and subsidizing. And then going forward, people would have that once permanent housing gets built. There's a lot of additional work that has to be done from an environmental standpoint to make sure that it's okay to ultimately get back into the territory that's been destroyed. So there's just so much. What I can say is we're doing all that we have available to us right now. There's going to be a discussion 48 hours from now about how many units exactly we think we can build, and also whether or not we want to go the extra mile and put more incentives for people to go into what were short-term rentals into long-term rentals. We intend to make very robust offers so that people get much more rent, I guess you would say, if they do change over from a short-term to a long-term rental. I think we're looking at 175% of the base. So those are things that we'd like to do. I would humbly like to ask everyone who has a short-term rental to convert it to a long-term rental. In our program with HHFDC, we already have 1,385 units or families that signed up to offer their units across the state. 527 are occupied. Those other 800 are available, and we'd love to move people into those. So continue to talk to your Red Cross leader that can help you. Continue to talk to my team. we want everyone that we can to get into stable housing. We will have to build, I think.
We want to continue on in the discussion about housing, but also just the broader general sense of support that is needed for residents. And we're getting a lot of questions in, so we thank those viewers who are sending in the questions. Steven asks, how can we have weekly updates and community meetings with Lahaina residents? What more do you think can be done to hear some of the specific concerns of the community to ensure that they're getting to people like yourself? We know that you obviously cannot be on the island of Maui all the time, but what are some of the efforts that you're doing to maybe improve the communication to hear directly from some of these residents?
So I've been doing a couple things. I make direct calls, actually, to people that were displaced. That's something that I just feel is important to do personally. Of course, the mayor has weekly meetings, and we will have 2 meetings that I'll announce tomorrow, likely. A little more specifics will be forthcoming about some of the new plans that we're going to have. I'll be there, of course, to hear in person, because it's that large a situation and big a deal to hear what people want as far as settlement for lost loved ones. Those kind of questions. Our staff and team are over there day in and day out, especially our human services team. That's the team that's working on the TANF relief, the temporary assistance for needy families. We want to make sure we're really beefing that up, because so far we've had 998 applicants, which is good, but there are 3,071 families that were displaced. So I want everyone to be applying for those resources. So if for some reason FEMA support's not enough, or Red Cross support's not enough, or you haven't gotten extra support from the People's Fund, that we can get that amount of dollars to you. So there's someone there all the time, honestly. And, really, I'm always available one way or another for emails, calls, and so on. A lot of people do call me directly.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that Maui Relief Fund. We know you have a big press conference tomorrow, so we don't want to necessarily jump the gun on that, but we'd love a little preview about what this fund will entail, who will be eligible, and what kind of a dollar amount are we talking about?
So I don't blow all of the punchlines for tomorrow, which I promised, access to everyone. I will tell you that it will look a lot like the 9/11 fund. My hope is to be generous to families. I'm putting families first that lost loved ones or who had a severe injury, because I think that's the right thing for us to do in Hawaii. I also have constructed a very solid alliance amongst several partners who I will announce tomorrow. Those partners are putting a lot of money into this fund, as will the state, to make sure that not only can we help settle claims, and that's important, but also that we can go to the next step after we've helped those who lost a loved one, that we can go to the 561 households, for example, that were living in the house that they owned in Lahaina. We want to help them in case insurance didn't make it, in case they didn't have enough resources. And then to the next group, the 1,800 houses that were destroyed, that were owned by others and were renting. All of these things are necessary. And in my opinion, and I think that most people share this opinion, if we do this together and we're not divided in court, if we're not divided by outside forces from the mainland, number one, a lot more resource will go directly to the people who lost everything, because there won't be a lot of interlopers. And two, it's really the right thing to do, because when you're in an island state, you have to rely on one another around you. And I will continue to ask for support from the president. They've been very generous. I know we're going to get HUD support, but for now, I before long want to help these people that lost a loved one.
And again, we know that you want to save some of that information for tomorrow, but we also want to just ask some specific questions, maybe about the funding itself. How do you see that long-term being able to continue to fund this, knowing that this is a long-term effort? And also maybe on a second tier question, as you look forward to formalizing your budget that you'll present to the legislature next month, are you going to be asking for the legislature's support in allocating some of the state resources and funds for something like this?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to designate tens of millions of dollars to this fund right off the bat. It's the right thing to do. I would do this for any community across Hawaii. If a fire occurred in Kailua, or like we had one in Mililani, if that had touched the town, if it happened in Hilo, we would do this for anyone. So we have to do right by people who have lost everything. But going forward, we have to have a much better approach to have resources. So tomorrow I will also announce the beginnings of the legislative process, because we're going to make sure that we can, and the word is used frequently, is securitize. We're going to make sure that we can, while protecting our rates and protecting our state budget, that we can bring resources in, and there are a lot of mechanisms to do that. I'm learning quite a lot about this process. That's going to be important in the next legislative session. And let me share something that I really believe we should do. I think that we do need a climate impact fund going forward, something that helps us because insurance rates are going to get very high. It'll be hard for anybody to find insurance for their home in a era where there are fire risks, where there are tsunami risks, where there's climate change. Most states haven't done this yet. We should. And so look to me to find resources, likely through the TAT tax, but everything will be on the table to make sure that we can secure ourselves and our future. I like the idea of having it from the travelers that come to the islands, though. I think that's the fairest approach. You know, I did actually propose that before our first session and before the fires. We need to do this. We need in our island state in Hawaii to have these resources. That was the green fee that was described. The simpler way to do it, I'm told, is through the TAT. And just I think that that's good for our future. But all these questions about funds, whether we have a fire marshal, whether we have fire breaks, whether we can have the $24 million that we've already asked for in the budget really easily and readily available, it will have to come from somewhere. And the economy is solid, but it's not perfect. And we did have a minor setback economically also. We had the tragedy, which is the most worrisome part of this whole experience, but also revenues are not going to be super high because some people paused in their travels to Hawaii. So I think we're going to need this money, and it's going to be my goal to get it.
Okay, I want to go back to the fund itself, and you likened it to the 9/11 fund. In that case, and forgive my ignorance, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that families who did decide to participate in that then were not allowed to sue on their own. So you'll be having to make this pitch essentially to families to say, this is worth doing. Don't pursue, your own private sector lawyer. What is the pitch to those families? Why should they participate?
On several points, it'll be better for people. Number one, we'll be able to get monies to people immediately, likely in the first quarter of next year. Two, they won't have to give up 35% of whatever their settlement is because it will be a very straightforward process. And I do believe actually the legal community, for the most part, is going to be very supportive of this move. That's another thing. Also, I'm going to make sure that there's enough money in there that it exceeds what a normal settlement would look like for individuals that lost a loved one. I think we should be generous to people. There is no number that will ever make people feel okay about losing a loved one. But of course, I want them to be able to rebuild their lives, and I want them to be able to send their nephews or nieces or children to college. I want them to be able to find a home again. So that is what I'll be sharing with people. It'll be completely optional. I will tell you that because I have a relationship with the individuals that did the 9/11 fund, I have them working pro bono for us on this. So it'll be very solid as a rock, so that there's no concerns, and that process will play out over the rest of this fall. I just want to say to people, all I care about is that we are as supportive as we can be for those who lost everything, and they should make up their own minds ultimately about this kind of a settlement. There's a lot more work that will be necessary going forward, but my main approach is going to be to bring this hui of all of our partners across the state. It won't even be just the companies that have been mentioned in the course of the fire, like HECO or the state or the county. It'll be other companies too, because I think people are very generous, and I want to raise additional resources so that we can help people through the rough spots, like if they lost their property or if they have to relocate to a different part of Maui because the land is not ready yet. So there's so many reasons to help people. But again, it'll be discussed, and people should do what they think is best for themselves.
A big part of the recovery effort and just the overall recovery of the economy will be tied to what's happening on Maui. And we had that reopening that you announced for visitors to West Maui last month. How have things been going with the introduction of tourists back into that area? What have you heard from residents who are now welcoming in tourists? And what are those numbers looking like in terms of arrivals and those who are actually visiting and supporting areas like, those that were impacted beyond Lahaina?
The arrival numbers, as predicted, were very low. And we knew for sure that we were not going to see significant numbers until well into the fall. It was really about beginning, just beginning the process. And I have to provide a little bit of extra inertia for people to get things going, because after a crisis like this, people are stunned. And it's important to plan for the future. And I know that that's very hard, because for some it came off as too soon or not sensitive. Believe me, the tears that we shed them for everyone that's going through this transition. But we also have to prepare for the future, because in time, we're going to have to build fire breaks. In time, we're going to build the new school, which you have read about. We have to fund the fire department. And so we're at about 40% right now. It's way down. There's very few people visiting West Maui. The place that they are going in West Maui, I believe, is mostly to Kapalua, which was pretty far away from the area of the crisis, of the fire. But I need people to at least have the opportunity to go back to work. You know, it is frustrating to me when someone takes a passionate position and then tries to block something that would affect recovery. Not because I don't think people should have freedom of speech, of course I do, but everyone is suffering and struggling on Maui. And people, of course, are struggling even more in West Maui, but so many people are trying to rebuild their lives. The sooner I can get people financed through their job or through the grant programs I have, the sooner they'll be able to either buy a new house or do a long-term lease. So those numbers that are, like I said earlier, at 67.91 in hotels, I'd like to see that drop by 1,000 or 2,000 every month. And to do that, people need resources. But I can do it from lots of different angles. Fortunately, the TANF monies, the $100 million that we've put into the mix, we're already kind of set aside from the core budget. There's a lot of TANF money that's been saved over the years for these needy moments, for these crisis moments. So we had that available. But yeah, very few people traveling. The numbers will increase. We will not kick people out of hotels for tourists, but we will have people transition to places like fewer hotels so that there's just not as much potential conflict. I haven't heard any stories personally. I'm sure there are the occasional moments, because people are really, they're going through a lot. But most people welcome tourists. Most people welcome the opportunity to have that paycheck.
I want to go back to something that you mentioned in gearing up for the legislative session, and this idea of an environmental impact fee. Are you saying that you want to pursue the green fee, or when you talk about TAT, is that a different funding mechanism? Would that just be increasing TAT as a designated environmental impact fee within that? And I would imagine that the visitor industry might not like that.
Honestly, it would be very similar. Increasing the TAT and at the same time giving people some credit for their participation in the recovery is a model that could work. Increasing the TAT, say by a percentage point or 1.5 percentage points, versus coming up with a fee that everyone would pay, it would have essentially the same impact. It's just that we already have a mechanism to collect it. I want to say this, the hotels have been extraordinary. They've been so kind and generous, and this is just simply the way you could do it without difficulty. It's also already vetted, it's legal, and you would designate that increase in the TAT tax specifically to these climate impact needs. That's what I would commit. We don't want extra tax revenue for nothing. But think about it in these terms. We have to fight fires. We now know that that is our largest risk. It's been clearly described all across the media. And it is a fact that that is our largest risk right now, as we saw with the Mililani fires, and we saw the fires over on Big Island in Waikoloa. So we have to do more to deal with a dried state. We have anticipated already a drought condition for next year. So this is going to continue on. And if we don't do these things, think of what happens. If you have a fire like we had in Lahaina, it's a $5 billion disaster, and in some cases, loss of life. So it's a small price to pay for people to travel here so that we can do all the things to keep them safe. Mind you, we're also keeping tourists safe. So in my opinion, that's the right way to go. but we'll have that discussion in the legislature.
And just to follow up on that, because there was some pushback when you initially proposed this last legislative session that ultimately led to not passing through, the legislative process. Have you had any conversations with leadership on both sides of the House and Senate about this new idea, and what has just maybe been their primary response to this idea?
I have, and so I appreciate the input. I think it's pretty clear that we were correct, that we need this. If we had passed the climate impact fee back in May, we'd already have resources flowing into our state to deal with the recovery already. So sometimes an idea just happens to be correct. I'm sure that there's many times when I'm wrong, but this is one where we're correct. We have to have it, and I think it's going to be favorably viewed, because I don't think people have much tolerance for extra taxes on property right now, where property is so expensive. I don't think it will be easy. It's never easy to raise taxes elsewhere. So I think that is the right way to go. And it is the impact that we have to prepare for. We have to prepare our roads in a special way. We have to prepare for accidental fires that sometimes occur. So it's the right thing to do. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get it right.
How much money are you hoping that this would generate for the state?
$150 million a year minimum is what increasing the TAT to 12% would do. And it's all coming through travel. We also, remember, have had a concern that we had too many travelers coming into the state of Hawaii for quite some time. Before the fire, we already had begun the debate about managing tourism much better. And so I think, this is probably the right time to do it. We already have gone into contract with CNHA to help manage tourism better. And I want to say something. It's a little bit a day early, but I want to also thank CNHA. They reached out to me to help out with this kind of Ohana initiative that I'm putting forth, which does include the recovery fund. Very generous of them to reach out in advance and say that this is something they wanted to help with.
One of the other sectors that has been impacted by the fires is just the overall businesses that are trying to rebuild. Many have already shut down, noting that they've lost structures or just don't have personnel anymore. How can the state provide further support for some of these businesses? Because we know that the state has released some money initially, but there is some holdup. How can things be expedited to ensure that these businesses are able to not only reopen, but continue to succeed?
Yeah, I met with the United Way folks from Maui yesterday to ask that they support this rollout also. They weren't initially involved. MEO, who are just a terrific organization, Maui Economic Opportunity, they're managing several things. One of them is the business grant. So I did immediately authorize $12.5 million with the help and blessing of the Senate and the House. In fact, with the first idea came from the senators. So absolutely, that $12.5 million needs to get into small business pockets, up to $20,000 a loan, and they've been slow to get it out just because they're dealing with so many different crises over there. So more and more people can help, is all I can say. If someone lost their home or were displaced, they can get up to $30,000 from the TANF program. Then they can get up to $20,000 with this loan program, which we call it a forgivable loan, because we're not allowed to just give people grants if they duplicate resources. But a forgivable loan is essentially that. It's gone after a year if you're still in the state. Then, of course, all of the questions about whether people had insurance, whether they have assets. There are jobs that are going to be lost for good, and people are going to have to start different businesses, and they can take these resources, whether it's a check for 20 grand or 10 grand. It's not going to solve all their problems, but the goal is to bridge to the future. And a lot of new people are going to be at hotels working. Some people are going to choose other parts of the state where we have so many jobs right now. We don't have enough people to fill. And that's one of the things I want to remind people, that maybe it's going to be a couple years before the community in Lahaina decides it wants to rebuild. You might want to spend a little bit of time in a different region, not leave the state, but take us up on the offers to pay for people's rent as a part of these other housing programs, so that you're staying close to home. And then, of course, once extra housing is built, that should be yours. So many options. I'll tell you, it's never easy. It's a natural disaster, no doubt about it. And whenever you see, more than 3,000 structures erased, you're going to have a long rebuild.
I want to ask you a little bit about the environmental impacts that we have seen. Of course, we're focusing so much on revenue here, but nothing can get built. Housing can't happen if we don't have clean water and if you don't have clean land. So, sort of two areas there. Where do you think that all of this fire debris should go? There have been a lot of discussions. We know that the most toxic stuff is going, or debris is going to the mainland, but the stuff that stays in Hawaii, where should that go? And then let's talk a little bit about water after that and access to clean water in Lahaina.
Yes, absolutely. So first off, just statistically, there are 1,500 parcels essentially. Some had two structures on them, some had one. Of those 1,500 parcels, 1,403 have been cleared by the EPA now, which is good. That's over 90%. It's like 93%. And that means people are getting into their properties and saying goodbye and getting some closure. Now, as to where the debris goes, that's a vibrant discussion that's going on between the Department of Health, the EPA, and the county. And honestly, I defer to them to make the final choice. My personal opinion, is we should do what we have to environmentally protect that landfill, and that we should take care of the debris here. My reason for that is because some people feel that when there's a lost loved one or some part of their past, they want it to stay near home. And so I think we would miss that if we took the debris to Washington State or Arizona or somewhere where we paid for a landfill. But that's just my opinion. My opinion is, because we view Iwi Kupuna so sacredly, we should respect that. That also right now is going to be a temporary solution. They will be doing what you can do to protect any leaching from a landfill. I know we're going to get pushback if we do keep it here, but that's the conundrum, right? You try to help and you want to be thoughtful and considerate, yet a group will still come over the top and throw hand grenades at you because it's not what they want. What I think we should do is we should listen to the people of Lahaina, especially those who lost loved ones, and follow their lead.
Okay, and then the second part of that question was the water issue. Our partners at Civil Beat did a big article today just about how toxic the water may be, how damaged those pipes are, and how much that could actually slow the rebuild. What are your thoughts on that? We know that water is handled by the counties, but obviously the state's involved with this.
Yeah, we'll have to support the county with infrastructure dollars and HUD dollars. Water will have to be kind of repurposed and relocated from afar. You can't use any of the previous water system. I mean, it's completely melted. So that's going to take time. It's clear, though, that the people of Lahaina have not yet made a decision of what they'd like the region to look like. I stand ready to offer other parcels of land up Mauka if someone wants to rebuild there. We're discussing 3 different lots right now, or 3 different areas that the mayor is considering to build extra housing. It could be a long time before Lahaina is ready for rebuild, because if you don't have water, you can't do anything. I did ask my water folks, the Seaworm and those guys, to give us an updated plan, over the next 2 months, to know when they think water would be available and whether other wells need to be drilled. So all of these are very real problems. That's why when I say somewhat casually it's going to take several years to rebuild Lahaina, it will. It's not just clearing out the debris. The debris can be cleared out in 6 to 9 months. We've already entered into a contract with the Army Corps of Engineers. It's likely to be a $1.5 billion expense. The president was relatively easily convinced. He's been incredibly supportive. President Biden has been great to pay at least all the costs for the first 6 months. I will ask, of course, for an extension if we need it, but we use the 6-month number to kind of motivate ourselves to get that debris cleared. But you ask all the right questions. You clear the debris, you do it quickly, where does it go? Once the debris is there, and if the land still has some toxins in it, what do you do next? You don't want to put people next to heavy metals. You'll have to mitigate that. So these are the large questions that the people of West Maui will ask. Meanwhile, we'll try to make every possible opportunity available for work and housing, but even that's going to be slow. And that's why I'm personally accelerating the recovery for those who lost a loved one, and then the actual homeowners that occupied their properties. I figure those are 2 areas where everyone can agree we should care for people.
Okay, we've got much more to discuss with the governor when we come back. We're going to take a short break. You're watching Spotlight Now.
Welcome back to Spotlight Now. We are live once again with Governor Josh Green. Spent the first half talking about Maui. Want to move on to some of the other issues impacting the state. One of the other hot topic issues, of course, is what cleanup effort is happening with Red Hill. What can you tell us about that update as the military continues this unpacking phase? Your conversations with the military, how have things been going, and your overall approval of this process?
Well, it's been good. So they went through the first part, the unpacking, without a glitch. The pipes were unpacked completely, they were repaired, and there was not a drop of fuel. Then we've begun to see the actual draining of Red Hill with gravity. And we started this on October 16th. It's gone successfully so far. They are right now over 2/3 of the way done, over 66% of the way done, which as a volume goes, that's over 70 million gallons as of today out of the 104 million gallons that are there. So the earlier projected dates, which were all the way in the spring, were more than 5 months ahead of schedule, have now continued to move closer to where we are today. We're now at around the 17th or 18th of November when we will be about 99% of the way drained of Red Hill, leaving only the last bits of kind of sludge and the stuff that you would have to kind of go in there and collect almost manually, which is a great thing because obviously then the risk is far lower. We will have, knock wood, seen a big success, and I think this is important to Hawaii on many levels. We've gone through a crisis. I can't really expose people to yet another large issue. Let's get through one at a time. But this means that by springtime, when they get that last sludge out, then we'll be able to close Red Hill forever. So mahalos to Commander Wade. He and his team have been very thorough, and they've added so many redundancies at our request and the request of the Board of Water and everyone else. The advocates have been excellent. Everyone's on the same page. Get the fuel out, close Red Hill. So again, ahead of schedule.
Well, and you say that everyone's on the same page. You know, there had been discussions as to repurposing the facility for perhaps another use or repairing it in some way. Is there a final word on what is going to happen to the tanks themselves?
Well, I think we're not going to be able to use them for a long time. For one thing, we have to store this fuel, and we did expend a lot of resource to build tanks above ground so that we can monitor, visually any possible leak. So some of those resources are gone. We did look at using the Red Hill tanks, which are, by the way, I'll remind people, giant. There are 20 of them. They're bigger than a football field each. And there was some talk about making hydropower out of that. In other words, putting water, using the delta in height down to the ground level. That creates potential energy when you have water or anything that's uphill and you release it. It can then turn a turbine, creating active energy, actual thermal energy. But the math didn't work. It wasn't high enough to make it really worth it. Also, I think there's a certain lack of trust about whether or not those tanks are still going to have some residual junk in them, whether it's going to somehow affect the water table and whatnot. So I think it's better to leave well enough alone then, and then turn our attention to remediating the water table, which is super important because that feeds into what we can do in the future, especially housing.
I want to touch upon another topic and another issue, and that's tourism. We briefly talked about it in the first half of this interview in relation to Maui and its impacts, but the entire state also obviously impacted by tourism. You are embarking on a trip in a few days to Japan. If you can tell us a little bit about what specifically you're hoping to get out of this trip.
Sure. So Jamie and I are going to go to Japan for about 4 days. One of the things I'm doing is meeting with most of the prominent ministers, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Tourism, and people that I've developed relationships with over the years. I think the Deputy Prime Minister also. I need to have these relationships because I need to continue to encourage investment in Hawaii and tourism in Hawaii. I would have loved to see the Prime Minister, but ironically, he's going to be in the United States at the conference, APEC over in San Francisco at the same time. But seeing these ministers, I'm going to go with some of the leadership. Speaker Psyche, who I'm very close to, is going to also come on this trip. And that way together we can make the case for return of tourism. Now, the challenge we have is the yen. The yen is not very strong right now. So that makes it hard. But people will over time come back. And that was one of the main reasons I wanted to express to people that Hawaii continues to welcome tourists in general. Not at the same numbers perhaps, but the Japanese tourists have always been our most thoughtful and considerate visitors, and they really have this kind of lifelong relationship with us, so they know what it means to, kind of malama or aina and so on, like we always say. So I think that they will over time come back, but it's slow. The 1-2 punch of COVID and then the concerns, the disaster combined with a weaker yen, that makes it hard.
Yeah, this is the part of the interview where we ask you questions on a variety of topics, and I just want to make sure we get through as many as possible. So excuse us as we go left to right to left to right. But we had Prosecutor Steve Allman here and the Honolulu Police Chief Joe Logan in our studio last week, and they talked about, or 2 weeks ago rather, and they talked about both how they are so concerned this legislative session about the possibility of recreational marijuana passing. It looks like this is getting traction, gaining more support, came close last session but didn't make it. What are your thoughts on this?
My general thoughts are adults should be able to make up their own minds about consumption of marijuana or use of marijuana. We have a very vibrant medical marijuana program that works well, but only for about 20,000 people or so, maybe a few more. And so it's not adequate for those who choose. I don't think that there should be anything to prevent an adult, if they make a choice to have marijuana in their life, especially for health considerations or for their own well-being. I am a little bit concerned always because there was a report in the last couple of days about the impact on people's heart health. Anything that is smoked does affect heart health, and that's a concern. I'm a little bit more open-minded on this particular issue, perhaps, than the chief or the prosecutor. I like them both very much. They're worried about added crime, and we'll always take that into consideration. One way to continue to advance this program without making too much of a wave or a concern is to take away all the restrictions that exist based on people's health considerations. In other words, if a person chooses to see his or her doctor and that person does give them a medical marijuana license, I would never get in the way, just like I won't get in the way of a woman's reproductive rights or a person's choice about end-of-life issues. I will at least recommend that, and that's something they should consider. Full legalization does have some concerns for young people, but I'm open-minded, and I await what the legislature sends me.
And just to follow up on that, one of the other concerns is just the overall infrastructure about adding yet another department to a state entity like the Department of Health or whatever department it falls under, and just the logistics that come about in trying to set something like this up. Do you think that the state is ready to take on something like this?
It would take time for sure. I have spoken with my directors, both the law enforcement folks and the health team. Both of them are really reluctant to have this be part of our governmental milieu. Maybe we'll have Hawaii News Now help us out with this program.
I want to ask you about your COVID boosters. Have you gotten your COVID booster? We hear that the uptake is relatively slow. I know anecdotally, a pharmacy that will remain unnamed canceled on me twice to get mine, and I finally had to go to my primary to get it. So are you concerned that maybe perhaps not enough people are getting their boosters this time around?
Always concerned. I went and got my booster like the second day that it was available. I hate being sick. I do believe in a vibrant immunization program. But yeah, we're now in the fourth year, basically. We're moving into the fourth year. And as I shared a lot, probably more than anyone wanted to hear during the lieutenant governor years, this is basically a 5-year program, but the first 3 years are the worst when you deal with a coronavirus. So it's not as severe right now. Hospitalizations are very manageable. I still get updates weekly from our teams, but go get your booster if you have any health considerations that would merit it. And frankly, I just think everyone should get the booster because it's really no big deal, and it'll peak your immunity.
We're going to continue the popcorn questions as we switch to another topic, and that is Aloha Stadium, and just an update there as people continue to wait on some sort of progress. What can you tell us about that process, and how optimistic or hopeful are you that this is something that will happen next legislative session and continue to move forward?
I'm completely confident it will move forward. We've done the RFQs and the RFAs. Those are kind of requests for information and getting people's initial proposals. There's a lot of people interested. And then the plan is, as we go into 2024, that those full proposals will be vetted and approved. I did ask our guys the other day what the process will be like and how we'll demolish the old stadium. And they said that's part of the proposal too. It looks like we can stay on schedule. We do need a new stadium, in my opinion, very badly, because the football program, in order to recruit and to stay vibrant, as cool as it is to have our old quarterback here coaching the team, and I just love the guy, it's difficult. It's difficult when you're playing in a much smaller facility, and you don't want to get downgraded to Division II or III because then you have no revenue. We'll build a stadium.
Okay, and one of the things that will likely go with the stadium is housing.
Yes.
We know that this is really, something that you've hung your hat on, is building affordable housing. The emergency proclamation is now it's in third iteration, if you will. You've taken away, arguably a lot of the teeth of that initial proclamation. Do you think that it still will be effective in creating new housing?
Yes, especially for state properties and state programs. We can do that without any resistance whatsoever. Also, I was even at the launching of an affordable housing project today, a rental project with Mayor Blangiardi, who's a really great partner, and kudos to him and his team for getting things going here in town. Absolutely. We replaced Nani after her resignation with a cohort, a team of people so that nobody can threaten them. And they're going to take turns running the meetings and just doing what they do. I will point out that after all of that brush up, I think it was Hawaii Business News did a poll, and 81% of our citizens supported the emergency housing proclamation and what I'm doing with that. 81%. I mean, you never can find 81% agreement on anything. So that was really terrific. And so we're just going to go forward with it. The couple months delay that we had because people threatened my folks, I'm definitely adding that to the end of the year to make up for that time to keep us going. And I'm going to keep us working on this until we get enough housing starts to feel comfortable that we're dealing properly with the future. Way, way, way too many of our young people are leaving the state, and we need to have housing for them in the pipeline.
One of the other parts of that is your Kahale initiative, and we've spoken many times in the past about where you're going with some of the new places. Is there any updates on that front about what we see here on Oahu happening in other parts of the state that you are currently trying to advocate for right now?
Yes. So Middle Street is going to be next. That's the big one, and that will be toward the end of the year. We also have plans for Big Island. It's really a vibrant program. The mayor and team are working with us and vice versa so that we can have a recovery center in Iwilei opened, which again is an extended kauhale. We have to relocate the kauhale that's at the Department of Health per my commitment at the end of the year. Honestly, I really wish it could stay there, but because it does so much good work. But we're going to repurpose some of those units over to Middle Street, and we're going to put some other kind of hubs for hygiene and not just showers, but also wound care and that kind of thing in and around this the city. So lots to share. We're going to have well more than a dozen, probably closer to 20 by the end of this term, this 4-year term. And that's a lot of tiny housing units for people to go into. We have to do other things. We have to get them drug treatment. One of the reasons that we rolled out a program which is just incredibly successful, loan forgiveness for healthcare providers. We're going to pay down the loans for a lot of people, local kids who go into mental health care and primary care, behavioral health, which is drug treatment. All those disciplines, we had over 800 applicants in the first 3 weeks. And it's $30 million, but that's the best way to spend money, to have doctors and nurses and psychologists and social workers stay in the state of Hawaii to care for those people on the street and just to care for our kupuna and whoever needs it.
Okay, we talked a lot about the fire danger and what's happening on Maui in the first half of this program, but I want to circle back and talk about the fire dangers statewide. We did see fires here on Oahu just this week, and not threatening structures just yet, but obviously a big concern and a big expense for the state. Tell us about how you're starting to figure out what the fire plan should be, for the entire state and also specifically here on Oahu.
Yeah, so we're having discussions with the leadership at the legislature on this. We already have teed up certain appropriations. You've heard about the $24 million that we're going to ask for extra fire infrastructure. What we have to do is, in some parts of the state, usually the western parts of each of the counties, you have to pre-place some fire equipment so that you can get there more quickly. We've also seen, for example, HECO update their fire response plan, and we're a party to that, where we have extra spotters from HECO and from the firefighters so that they can see when there's high winds where fire could be breaking out. We have to have a fire marshal. We are already using Department of Transportation dollars, which do come with a dollar for dollar, I believe, federal match, to cut some escape routes. Waikoloa on the Big Island had a fire the same day that we had the Lahaina fire. And then, just so people know, if we don't spend the money on managing fires and putting them out, we're going to spend much, much, much more when the fire reaches any kind of property. So, for example, we spent $500,000 just dropping water from helicopters recently in Melilani. So we need to do this. That's why I hope and expect it will not be too big a lift for me to repurpose some monies from taxes. We've talked about TAT. I'm open to whatever options people choose, but we need to have a dedicated fund to deal with fires and climate change. If we do that, we're going to be the best state in the country on this matter and set an example for the rest of the country. So we'll do it, but these fires are pretty frequent now, and they're not easy to put out. I was actually at a function today at noon honoring firefighters across the state, and my gosh, those guys, I mean, they work so hard. So we need more firefighters. There's going to be overtime until we have enough. It's a challenge. It's a real challenge. So these are the big issues that you're very smart to already be focusing on. I think we'll be doing a lot of talking about how to have the statewide plan in place as soon as possible. We didn't cover much of this in previous conversations, but we did do a deep dive into the use of sirens. And we already updated our siren protocols so that sirens can be expected to be used if the local emergency management folks deem it necessary, specifically for fire. Historically, as you know, it was mostly for tsunamis, but I wanted to get all the fire captains on board, and they are, with how we'll go forward. So people should anticipate clarity on that issue and anticipate, if I'm not mistaken, more revenues from travelers to go towards climate change.
And so just to follow up on that, is that going to be a campaign to educate people about these siren warnings? Because there was sort of that mixed messaging coming out of the press conference after the Maui fires with, then director Ndaya giving, some comments about the usage of those sirens. What can we expect in terms of just the education format of that?
Absolutely. I think there has to be a lot of PSAs. I think that people have to, over the course of just a couple years, understand exactly how we'll use the sirens. The sirens actually are going to have to be upgraded. That's another, need for appropriations. I will also share that I've spoken with the Secretary of Energy, Ms. Granholm, who's just incredibly smart, just so good, about long-term appropriations on energy and for infrastructure for us, which means wires and cables and putting some of them underground. All these things are necessary. I do believe the military will help us significantly after we have finished off the remnants of Red Hill. I think we move to the next chapter, and we are in this together. Just like these companies are coming together to help me with the recovery fund on Maui, I believe the federal government and the military and Department of Energy are going to come together to help Hawaii deal with what is an outlier risk because we're in the islands.
I mean, we have covered so many issues. I don't know how you keep it all straight, but when I think about the legislative session coming up, we only have we have limited funds. We don't have those COVID dollars from the federal government coming anymore. What are going to be their priorities? Should we expect sort of obviously a Maui-centric session with this TAT? What I see is frankly a fight coming up to get that TAT to 12%, and then fire danger for the rest of the state. But then you also have the Red Hill issues, affordable housing, all the things we talked about. How do you prioritize what you're going to be fighting for this session?
Well, I'm going to come back, as I shared with the cabinet the other day. I'm going to come back to the basics. It's still about housing. It's still about affordability for our people. We did basically crack the code on healthcare, so we're now going to have lots and lots of healthcare providers. We enhanced education, public education, really dramatically with a good new contract. Now we're far closer to being matched with what our needs are Teachers stayed in the discipline because they got better pay. So we dropped by 2/3 our shortage. So those things, I won't say they're off the table, but they are well on their way to solution. So it's going to be housing and affordability. Believe it or not, I'm still going to ask for a little bit more of the tax breaks for Alice families, because otherwise they are hungry, their children are hungry. We're not going to allow that in our state. And that's why it's going to be important to seek revenues and revenue enhancements from, in this case, we can use the TAT as the placeholder, but it has to be tourism driven. And I'm not willing really to put any extra burden on our people unless we can offset it for those who are most, most vulnerable. So those are the priorities. We already have all the resources in place for this 2-year biennium for homelessness. We already have resources in place for housing because, as you know, $600 million went over to DHHL, and Colley's doing a good job, Colley Watson. We already have a lot of monies in the revolving housing trust fund. One thing that we were able to do is a lot of the money from the legislature last session was put into what's called cash CIP. Those are cash projects that you only have the 1 year to do. Those are normally done through longer term bonds, but they had a lot of cash, so they did that. I have converted a lot of that, several $100s of those cash projects over to bonding projects, which you do over the course of 20 years, which meant that we have enough cash to deal with some of the recovery, some of the absolutely necessary solutions right now for fire safety. I mean, we just can't mess around with that. And then enough to help people who are really struggling. We also are going to continue to focus on early education. Lieutenant Governor's been doing a really good job on that. And so I want to thank Sylvia for that work. There's all these challenges, they still exist, but our bond rating remains good. I made our appeal to all of the major bond agencies a couple of weeks ago. I think I was at my best for that pitch. It's important that I perform for us so that we get a good bond rating. Those discussions will keep going, but it's my job to make some decent decisions on our economy so that we can do this stuff that we have always known we need. We're moving pretty aggressively on things, and so I'm glad that we moved particularly aggressively on housing and homelessness in that first year before this crisis arose.
We only have about a minute left, but I did, before we let you go, want to ask you about something that came up the last time we had the discussion with your wife, Jamie, and that was some of the threats that you were receiving about the work that you do and the criticism that has been coming for you, and some directed at your family. Have things settled down? How have things been going on that front in you just facing some of the criticism by some of the state? And outside the state as well?
Yeah, most of the threats came from outside the state once we dove into it. I was sharing with Yunji that my phone filled up and maxed out on death threats with messages, and I have to keep those in place because of the need to investigate a few of them. So no one from the mainland has been able to make a death threat because my phone messages are full. So for everyone out there, if you were thinking about a threat, please just send it in writing because you won't be able to leave it on my phone. But otherwise, people have been very loving and very supportive of us. One thing I did learn, and that's that it's just a tiny sliver of people that abuse social media and abuse this kind of approach. An incredible number of people have been supportive. In fact, we were very gratified to find out that 5% more people have been supportive of our work than even during the election. Some of that came out last week, and I was just I was very appreciative of that because Jamie's working so hard. Brooke, my chief of staff, is awesome. She's working hard. The whole team's working hard. And I'm working about 20 hours a day. So can't get everything right, but I definitely want to make sure that we're helping people. And I think those threats did not reflect what we really are about and what we're experiencing.
We appreciate you spending this full hour with us. We know there's a big announcement tomorrow. We got a little preview today. Thank you, Governor Green, for being here. We'll see you next month.
You bet.
We'll be right back.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, was good to hear from the governor. A lot of updates there. If you missed any part of the interview, encourage you to go back and watch it. We got updates from, of course, what's happening on Maui, but also as the governor prepares for the legislative session and some of the new initiatives.
Yeah, really interesting to hear. Tomorrow he will be making a big announcement because it is the 3-month anniversary since those fires began. But he'll be announcing this Maui Relief Fund. That will be money kind of mirroring the 9/11 fund that survivors can get and have access to. But if they do sign on to that, obviously, then they have to agree not to sue some of the parties involved. He didn't mention specifically what companies are going to be contributing to that, but it does sound like it'll be a mix of the private sector and, of course, the state itself. So very interested to hear what comes of that. And the idea, Ryan, of raising the TAT to 12%.
Yeah, should be very interesting, and the battle will continue. We thank you for watching Spotlight. Now we leave you with a shot of Diamond Head. We'll see you next week.